This is Codified Wisdom. Conversations with leaders sharing what experience has taught them and what they know now that they wish they knew earlier. Hosted by Eric Eager, CEO and co-founder of 4Impact Data.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Codified Wisdom. Hey, this is the podcast that we always kind of unpack the stories and lessons learned from great leaders. And man, today's guest is, I'm excited about because he has been on the forefront of a lot of the things I've been working on. And his name's Dan McMahon. He's a CPA, CMAA, and he's founding managing partner of Integrated Growth Advisors. And what they do is they're a firm dedicated to helping business owners and firms basically increase profitability, sustainability, governance, and really the long-term value as it scales. And, Dan's career spans 25 years as a CPA, a business advisor, and manufacturing, distribution, real estate. Man, he has got like so much knowledge packed in. And man, I'm excited, we're going to go kind of unpack his journey because he's got a pretty exciting journey of how he got to where he's at today. And, for our CPA accounting audience too, I think this is going to be impactful for them. So, hey, Dan, welcome to the show. Love to have you here. And then, we'll kind of get started on telling us a little bit tell me about when you were back in high school and you're trying to say, hey, what am I going to do when I grow up? Tell us about your story of how did you get to where you're at and kind of tell us about those little inflection points as you moved along.
Well, first of all, Eric, thank you for inviting me to be on the podcast. I really appreciate it. I really enjoy doing these, and I look forward to the conversation. So, going back to high school, rephrase that again, going back to high school.
Well, here's what I want you to do is tell us your journey. You can talk about your highlights, but as you learn through your career, what were the things that as you were walking to, how did you get to where you're at today? Tell me about the journey from high school, college, professional career. How did these inflection points get you to where you're at? And what drew you, first of all, what drew you into accounting? What ultimately pushed you towards the business advisory instead of being just a pure technical CPA?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question and the clarification. I can go back as far as high school at a time when, and I'll be blatantly honest, I was not a great student. I couldn't keep my attention on class. I was a daydreamer. I'm not going to say that I was intellectually above everybody in the classroom. I just had a hard time focusing and wasn't crazy about school. But I was always a really hard worker. And I remember my boss, I worked in a grocery store, a really classy grocery store in Hinsdale, Illinois called Kramer Foods. It's like a high-end uh, IGA actually, which is ironically the name of our firm, Integrated Growth Advisors is IGA. But I worked for this grocery store. And I remember my boss saying, Dan, you're such a hard worker. You're so focused at work. If you carry out that same level of focus and dedication and hard work in your studies, you are going to go very far. And I thought, man, if he only knew. I love being at work and being among my buddies and we used to stock the shelves and after hours we'd sing funny songs like, Mr. Sandman and stuff like that. And we just would clown around a lot. So but I always had it in me to be really tapped into algebra and college algebra and calculus. I was really good at those classes. I didn't have to prepare for them; they just came to me. So when I got into college, I took my first accounting class, and I truly had a love for algebra. And the very first accounting class, you learn that assets equal liabilities plus owner's equity.
Yeah.
A equals L plus OE. That's an algebraic equation. So I was like, wait a minute, I'm tapped into this. This is something I'm good at. And again, not being the greatest student, I always sat at the back of the room, never raised my hand. And something innate, it was inside of me. When I got into the classroom in college, I would sit in the front row and the professor would ask a question, I'd raise my hand. It's like I could try to push it down. I would just raise my hand. It's like I was inspired to follow this career path. So um, I didn't know much about accounting. I went through all of college, didn't even think I should be a CPA. I just wanted to make sure that assets equaled liabilities plus owner's equity. That's all.
Yeah.
I wanted to go
Yeah.
home at the end of the day and everything to be in balance. I go to sleep at night and not have any stress. Well, as I got further, towards the end of graduating from DePaul University in Chicago,
Yeah.
uh, they started pushing the CPA exam, and they said, you're going to take the CPA exam review class. And I was like, what? I was like, what is that? I just want to go work for a living and make good money and make sure that my books balance at the end of the day. That's what inspired me to get into it, is this algebraic equation in this sense that things balance at the end of the day. And my journey goes on from there, but that's really how I got started.
Well, and then, you obviously you go into accounting, you go and work, for an accounting firm. But your history is that you were audit partner and a sales and marketing leader, and then you started kind of moving into advisory. Walk me through those steps of now you're in an accounting firm, you're starting to do these functions, and and we've got to know each other. You started noticing things that was like, um, hey, this is, there's something that needs to change. You're starting to kind of sense this thing years ago. Walk me through the different roles, and then what were kind of the signals that you needed to take a different path, or there was something different that your role was beginning to evolve to.
In some respects, I think I was divinely inspired to be on this path. And, I didn't even know what a CPA was when I chose accounting. But I go back to the roots and my parents. My father always said, gave very good advice. He said, when you're trying to figure out what you're going to do, see if you can do something that someday you can do for yourself. Well, being an accounting practitioner is absolutely that. And my mother always said, she'd say, Daniel, you are very observant. And I'd think, wow, I carry that badge that I'm observant. That must be a good thing. And I became an auditor. So, as I was an auditor, I was also observant, not just of what I was auditing with my clients to make sure that their books were in balance and to make sure that all of the audit assertions were cared for in my audit work papers. But I started noticing in the operations of the firms that I worked for, I was observing leadership. And I kind of got tapped into that because I spent a lot of late nights working in the office. This is before you work remotely. This is in the early 90s.
Yeah, yeah,
A lot of late nights working in the office and cleaning up, review notes that I had from managers and partners, and I'd be working till really late at night, sometimes 2 in the morning. And I
yeah,
started to think, why am I doing this? I didn't sign up for this. I have a hard work ethic, as I told you about my grocery store boss.
yeah,
He loved my work. I did always have a very hard work ethic, so I was like also cut out for the industry. But I didn't want to give my life away like that.
yeah,
So I started paying attention in all firm meetings, and then I became a manager, and I was paying attention to how the managing partner was leading the operations team, which would be managers to partners. And then when I became a partner, same thing. I was always observing the leaders
yeah,
and the decisions that they made, how they communicated them, and then what the outcome was going to be. And I would play little games in my head, and I'd think, see how this turns out. And, we'll see if this pans out. And a lot of times it panned out for the better, but there were certainly times where, um, my things didn't go so well. And um, I would know right off the bat that doesn't seem like something a leader should be directing us to do. And it's not shortening my day as a staff person.
So, and so it sounds like, okay, so you're going through this career, and as we talked about, you're starting to see these patterns. And I experienced the same thing when I was at Ernst Young. I was like going, man, they're paying me X, and I'm copying papers, and I'm doing a bunch of stuff that at the time, you had to do tax returns, but I didn't feel like it was a big value add to the client. And so, I saw those things. But, as we begin to go through these things and you see, now these personal moments, these turning points that you go, I need to go from CPA, doing I want to say the transactional piece, to a trusted advisor. And, walk me through when you started hitting this inflection point of, wait a minute, CPAs, are one of the most trusted professions of any people and business advisors and people that come in contact with CEOs. CPAs are the number one trusted person that they interact with. And you started to recognize some of these things and started to see this, hey, wait a minute, we can do way beyond just doing what we consider the traditional transactional compliance work. Tell me how you went from, hey, I'm doing the audits, everything's ticking and tying, noticing leadership, and now you started to see these things where it's like, wait a minute, these leaders need a whole lot more help than just get me more reports and ticking and tying things. Walk us through that journey and kind of now how you started to do the jump over to integrated growth.
Well, intriguingly, I was always trying to find my way out of public accounting, and anybody that works in public accounting right now knows exactly what I'm talking about. It's a tremendous place to start your career, and if I spoke to a young person in high school going into college, I would encourage them to go down the path of an accounting career because you learn the language of business and you can get behind the numbers and understand so much. It tells such a story. Um, but when I was actually coming out of tax season, every year, I was in the profession for 20 years, every single year, because of those late nights, I'd be like, I got to find another job. And as I came up the ranks, and now I'm a manager, now I'm going to be a senior manager, and I can't find a job outside of public accounting. And I would talk to executive recruiters, and they'd say,
Yeah.
Dan, what do you know about business? And this is a little bit of a ploy to get me to leave my job. I mean, they would put me on the spot. What do you know about
Yeah.
business? I say, well, I understand about the balance sheet and the P&L, and I've walked shop floors, et cetera, whatever. And say, but you understand the business of accounting. Do you really understand the business of business? And that stuck with me. And when I had become, or I was about to become a partner in the firm that I was with, a regional firm in New England, and we had a strategic partnership with a company at the time that actually did what I do. And they came in and gave a presentation, and up on the screen they put a simple model of how a business looks. Simple model. Owner. All right, so a business owner operated business. Owner, and the owner's responsible for revenue, finance, and delivery of their products or services. And I sat there and I looked at that and I thought, this is the missing link. Like I thought I discovered the missing link. I mean, the whole world already understood it, but
Yeah.
to me, it triggered a deep sense of now I understand, and it's a little, vulnerable of me to admit this, but now I understand where I fit. I'm accounting and finance. There's this whole revenue side and this whole delivery side in a manufacturing company, for example, that I served as a CPA. So then I started actually digging in deeper to writing more management advisory comments. We used to do that to add value to our audit relationships, and I really enjoyed that part of the business. But
Yeah.
that presentation triggered in me that there is something more in in business that I could maybe, now that I understand this broader sense of the business, I can start to add value to my relationships. That's what really got me going down that advisory path.
So in the firm, your professional career, you started to go, you went from audit and you started, and so you started advisory practices, long. I mean, you were doing this, 14, 15, 20 years ago. And AICPA and everybody's been saying for the last 2 decades, hey, you need to, if you're a practitioner, you need to start growing your advisory. And it's even more evident today with the advent and acceleration of AI, automating a number of processes. You know, you jumped off. Tell me about the transition from, okay, you're recognizing advisory is key. You're starting to build it in the firm, and then you got that emotional point of, hey, I'm going to go do this on my own. I'm going to go start a practice to go do this, which is when I talk to some, great business leaders, there's always going to be that jumping off point of like, I don't know if I'm going to drown or not, but I'm going to dive off into this because I'm passionate about it. I want to do something about it. And but it's a big risk. You have to go talk to your family. You got to talk to a bunch of friends and go, I think I want to do this. Talk us about that. You're in a secure, firm, secure income, working hard, but you can rely on that. To now, you're going to jump over into this craziness of being an entrepreneur, building a practice, etc. Walk us through that mindset that when you made that jump.
Yeah, I would say being a partner or a senior manager that's committed to a firm outside of the big four, or outside of the very large international firms, that seems secure, but it's not as secure as you think it is. And I'd get into that later if you'd like. Um, what I was doing, remember I said I was observant. I was always
Yeah,
observant. I was always observing and um, just paying attention to the political um, winds, let's say, in
yeah.
America. You remember back when they would talk about, someday a tax return will be done on a postcard. You remember hearing
Oh
about
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Well, I
Simplified
started
tax
to
return.
think, yeah, I'm like, I'm no, at the time, I was no guy to look into a crystal ball and see the future. But I thought, what happens if those politicians actually pass that law?
Oh
Half of
wow,
my
yeah.
firm is out of a job, or half of the firm is trying to take my job because I was in the audit department. So, because transferable skills. So I started thinking, what's going to happen if that simple, that's not even technology, that's just an advancement of simplicity. Um, then I started thinking, well, what happens if technology starts to really take off? What's going to happen to this profession? So I had these deep-seated thoughts going back 20 years that coincided with the introduction to that firm, that advisory firm that put that slide up on the screen that showed me the owner, revenue, finance, delivery, and all of these things started clicking within me, and I thought I need to do more advisory work because also audit audit in a firm is a loss leader in some respects because it's recurring revenue and it's somewhat commoditized. There are no nuts and bolts to an audit that the client gets to see. The nuts and bolts are what you and I as auditors saw to protect our own firm. So I started to veer towards more advisory work. And at the same time, Sarbanes-Oxley came out and I jumped in full boat. I was like, this is something new. I'm gonna learn this and see what I can gain from it. Well, I didn't realize until I got maybe a year and a half into the Sarbanes-Oxley type work which was enterprise risk management, corporate governance, internal controls, and actually coming up with an internal control structure from a blank wall, like a blank whiteboard. We'd sit in a room with the client and we'd say, okay, what can go wrong in the order to cash received process, that whole process, what can go wrong? So we would pinpoint 6 or 7 areas and we'd say, okay, we need to have a control objective that aligns with those things that can go wrong to mitigate that risk. And I started to really get into this, and I enjoyed it because it was starting. I'm creative at heart, and I'm a bit of an artist, just for a hobby. And starting with a blank whiteboard and drawing upon all of my experience of having been a CPA and auditing for so many years, I really enjoyed it. And I started to see that this is something that really adds value to businesses. Now, I was doing it on a large corporate public company basis when it was Sarbanes-Oxley, but I thought this applies to private companies. And the thoughts I had about the postcard tax return and audit being a commodity and what's going to happen with technology, and all of a sudden I discovered this, and I thought this is a stepping stone towards advisory because I didn't really know. I'm 14 years out of college. I don't know how to be an advisor. I had hair at that time, but it wasn't gray. Now I have practically no hair and it is gray. But at that time, I was trying to wrap my head around something I could really grab an anchor, and that became the anchor for advisory services for me. That's how I took the step forward.
And so at that, and, did you walked in one day and you just, tell your fellow partners and stuff that, hey, I'm gonna go do this, and then that had to be a little bit of stress level of jumping off here because you were doing it before. I want to say you're jumping over in this advisory growth for CPA firms and trying to help educate them. When I want to say that it wasn't forefront and center like it is today. Um, Tell me about the journey. So you jump over and you start integrated growth, and now you're trying to shift and help firms understand the shift to advisory. That yes, you can do it. You and walk us through, kind of the lessons learned in the 14 years of doing this now. You've had a lot of successes. You've got a lot of great clients, and you help them in a number of different ways. But walk us through some of the, hey, I made an assumption here, and boy, did I learned the hard way on, accountants aren't ready to do this or their psychologies to do that. Walk us through, obviously, the success stories of the people who got it and you helped them. But tell us also some of the things where it took a little bit longer than you thought.
Well, there is one piece to the story that is the bridge from public accounting to advisory that I do today.
Yeah,
And if I could just
absolutely.
put that out there. Um, I had moved from Chicago to New England. Um, I was working for a firm as a manager. I became a partner. Hard work, deserved it. And along the way, one of the things that got me to partner was that I was good at bringing in business. And I had a lot of social friends and lived in Connecticut a short time, and all of a sudden I had all these friends and connections. And part of it was, hey, I'm new to town. Would you grab a coffee with me? And everybody would say yes. And I was willing to do that. So I started bringing in a lot of business, and then I became responsible for my local office in Connecticut. I was working on our internal business development function and strategy with my managing partner.
Yeah.
And then as I progressed, I started doing it we had 4 offices in my regional firm, and I was working with the 4 managing partners because I was doing a good job. And then they made me partner in charge of sales and marketing for the regional firm, which, was a leadership role.
Yeah.
Although, accountants, they have a department head meeting and they leave out the head of the sales and marketing department. I'm like, I'm a department head. I've got a marketing department that reports to me. You guys are doing audit and tax, and we have an opportunity to do cross-selling. You're not an audit or tax department head. You don't come to the department head meetings. I'm just craziness. So
It,
when that took place, I
yeah.
was like, I am not long for this industry. I gotta get out. So um so I had all this tremendous experience in this leadership challenge that I had to get through to these people. I was like herding cats, and I learned how to herd cats. There's a whole other podcast on how to do that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Um, but when I learned this, um, I started to think there is something else I can do. I can finally find my way out of this industry. And because I had served in that leadership role, and because sales and marketing is something that we as accountants struggle with, and I struggle with it too. I'm an accountant. I struggle with it. I struggle with it today. Um, I thought, I know how to do this. I can support firms in doing that. So I made the leap and I set up my advisory firm on the premise that I would help business owners with some of the management advisory type stuff that I learned through my auditing and enterprise risk management and internal control career. But when I work with accounting firms, I'm going to help them with sales and marketing.
And
And
boy,
and
I was going to say with accountants, that is, don't say sales, because most of the accountants
I know,
they don't like it. And again, just remind everybody, I'm also a CPA, and so I can speak from that. Man, nobody, I don't want to sell anything to my clients. I'm here to help guide and navigate them, but don't say the S word around me, because I'm going to get really uncomfortable really fast.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's always been four-letter words, but in the accounting profession, there's a five-letter word, and it is sales. So, but I just came right on. I said, we're the sales and marketing department, and that's what we do. And that was a shock within my organization, but it was the shock that I needed to put into people. I was like, look, if you guys don't sell, we're not going to achieve the goals that are set forth for the firm, much less the goals that were set on me. So when I did this with outside of my firm, I left my firm and started Integrated Growth Advisors. And one of the things as an entrepreneur, especially in the professional services world, whether you're a lawyer or an accountant or an engineer or whatever you are, and you're going to come out and be a consultant, you have to listen to the marketplace. You have to let them guide you on where you're going to go. Like I could have come out and said, I'm going to be the next Accenture, which I would have loved to have been.
Yeah.
Um, but that's just not realistic. And nobody would view me that way because they saw me as a CPA.
Yeah.
So I listened to the marketplace, and I paid attention when I was trying to pursue business opportunities. And the loudest voice was the accounting industry that appreciated my secret handshake because I'm a CPA.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not a glamorous guy. I'm not like a used car salesman. I'm a real down to earth person. And I've sat in their shoes. And what eventually took place is when I surveyed my opportunities, I was always going back to the accounting firms and they were always calling me in. So right now, I'd say about 70% of my book of business today is focused on the accounting industry. And frankly, I'd like it to be 50-50 because if you think about it, I could be 50-50, and as far as accountants are concerned, still be 100% committed to the accounting industry because 6 months out of the year, they can't pay attention to me anyway. I
It's
try to
true.
shift that and try to get them focused for the whole year, by the way. But they're so busy during January, February, March that they can't dedicate a ton of time working on strategy. we set the strategy in November, December. I work with them in these months to monitor and make sure things are going as planned and be available for dumpster fires that take place and stuff like that. But yeah, 70% of my book of business is accountants, and 30% of my book of business is other types of service organizations, manufacturing, distribution, those types of things. Um,
So, well, I was going to ask you, so, what have you found in the working with the CPAs? Now, you've been doing this, long before a lot of people. And now the world is in a massive disruption going on in the profession. And, I've talked to a lot of profession leaders and business leaders, and et cetera. And, they are sensing, they realize that this one is not well, you had the internet boom, and then all of a sudden you had, tax returns and you had tax prep software that was going to replace everybody. And then, all these, well, we've lived through this before, but we're now at an inflection point that I'm hearing over and over again. This is not we're going to live through it. This is transformational. And a lot of people that I know are now taking it serious. Like, okay, we can't rely strategically on 85-90% of our revenue coming in from just tax and audit. That used to be the primary revenue drivers of firms, 10, 20 years ago. Now they're realizing that AI is beginning to automate, make it faster, it commoditize that level of services. And now the urgency to shift to what you've been doing for 14 years, which is the things that really business leaders I've had friends of mine or CEOs have been begging their CPA to, can you help me with this? I need advice on this. I don't need to talk about what happened 3 months ago. I need to see what it looks like around the corner. Talk to me about now your years of experience. What were the biggest struggles that they've had in making this transition to advisory? What advice, would you give? And looking forward, if you were talking to a managing partner, with your experience, what would you say? Hey, these are the things you need to focus on, folks, because the world is changing, and I'm hearing transformation partners and the large firms that are being invested with by private equity. I'm hearing new terms, new titles of transformation engineer, transformation partner, transformation. I'm hearing it over and over again. And I would love to get your perspective on your years of experience up to this point and what's it look like around the corner.
Great question. And I will say that over the years as an advisor, I learned how to see around the corner. And that doesn't mean you're going to see 100%. You're going to see it's a little fuzzy, but you got to make some assumptions about what's around the corner and what you think is going to take place so that you can start to, point your ship in that direction. So the first thing that I would say is let's just acknowledge where we're at as a profession. And I believe firmly, and I spent so much time in this profession with multiple firms and speaking with a lot of value-added service providers like yourself, Eric. We've had some great conversations about this. Transformation is a word, but another word that you and I used the other day when we talked offline was we're in an evolutionary turning.
Yeah.
And, at one point we came out with spreadsheets. I think that was a bit of a Lotus Notes or Excel.
Oh, yeah.
That was an evolutionary turning. Actually taking laptops out into the field. That was all part of the tech boom of the 90s. We are in an evolutionary turning where there are going to be impacts, and I believe deep impacts in this industry. And if you listen to what the AICPA is saying, and Mark Kozil's at the head of the AICPA right now, and he's been speaking about this for years. I can think back more than 20 years ago hearing him at a conference speaking about um, uh, what's happening with the profession and where it's going into the future. And it is all about advisory because um, you have to be able to add that level of value, especially if jobs are taken because of strong advances in technology. So the first thing I would say is let's recognize where we're at. And where we're at is an evolutionary turning. And when there's an evolutionary turning, only the strong are going to survive. Let's face it. And that's not a
Well,
scare tactic to bring in more
no.
clients. That's a fact.
Well, and in this profession that we're talking about, um, you know, when you talk to somebody about their CPA firm, they don't think a lot of times of somebody that's game changing, fast to adapt, fast to change. Unfortunately, that's just kind of the profile that people think of in their CPA. In your experience now, like we're talking about this evolutionary period where, there's going to be disruption, change, etc. What guidance would you have, for the ones that are managing partners? Because the other thing a lot of people don't realize is that 75% of partners in CPA firms are at retirement age. And there's just not enough people coming in who want to be CPAs in the profession. Now, AI is going to help with a lot of efficiencies operationally, but you've got a lot of partners. Either I'm just going to run the clock out. I've lived through enough of these. But then you're going to have that next generation of partners who are left having to transition the firm, and they're the ones that are going to have to, when I say, digest or move through this evolutionary change. What advice have you got for, let's just say, the next gen? Because I got a feeling a lot of the older partners, myself, I got gray hairs. I think they're going to just, okay, I'm going to enjoy the fruits of my labor from years, and go enjoy my family, grandkids, etc. What advice would you have for that next gen that you can help them with this evolution? That it can be exciting, it can be a great change, and it can be fun. What advice would you give to them?
Well, I believe first and foremost, be willing to step outside your comfort zone. And I just was at breakfast this morning, and one of my friends said that he believes that life begins at the boundary of your comfort zone. So have the courage to step through outside your comfort zone and recognize that the rear view mirror on your car is very small. The windshield's very, very huge and wide. Get the perspective of the future and start to build some assumptions about the future. This could be a little bit uncomfortable for some accountants that spend all of their time auditing the past, accounting for the past, and doing tax returns of the past. I mean, there's clearly talented advisory professionals out there in the tax world that are forward looking, but be forward looking. Put your eye on the horizon. In fact, there's not just one horizon, there's more than one horizon. We do an exercise with our clients on 3 horizons. And depending on what the subject is, the 3 horizons might be the end of tax season. The next horizon is the start of next tax season. And the third horizon might be the retirement of 2 of your key partners. So what are you going to do at each of those horizons? And what's it going to look like? Stand in the future and give some credit to your current self from your future self, and start to put some traction and some steps in place to go down the path to achieve what you think is going to take place. With the advancements of technology, you can't be a laggard. You can't be a market laggard. You have to be an early adopter, and you're going to learn from mistakes as an early adopter. And as accountants, even myself, I was always trying to figure out the safest path outside of the profession. And it was just thrust upon me. So it's going to be thrust upon you. Just be an early adopter and have that courage and take on uh, some of the technology, the AI, the decision intelligence that we've talked about that you bring forward. Uh, have the courage to embrace that and learn through the experience. That's what I would say to that next generation. And don't forget the value, and you would know this more than me, but the value of a human in the loop. A human in the loop is the critical success factor to making sense out of whatever AI data comes forward. And that could be you. And imagine the value of you. There's so few of you. The value, it's supply and demand. The value is going to skyrocket of that professional that can figure this out.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty profound. What getting back to, because I don't want to be this, gloom and doom. In a lot of cases, this is exciting. I know that when I left and jumped in the profession, I was doing all these case studies, and I was tax strategy and all that stuff. And man, I was excited. And I started my first day at Ernst and Young, and I was very appreciative. We had great partners and a great experience, but it was like, bam, here's your stack of tax returns. Start ticking and tying, and you know. And I was like, wait a minute, what happened to all this cool strategy stuff? Well, now the mundane stuff that you had to do is getting automated, so that now there's an opportunity to jump into that more forward looking, more strategy, because it's going to be expected of me coming out of school these days. Talk to us a little bit about what you're excited about. We're all glooming and dooming, but there's also great opportunities, great experiences, new things that get people excited. Tell us what you're excited about looking forward.
Well, earlier in this call, I told you about how when I was in high school, I wasn't the greatest student. I would stare out the window. I was bored. I was bored with the mundane details that they felt they needed to teach us, and they did foundationally need to teach this stuff to us. That foundational stuff is being handled by AI in many respects. And what excites me in my role today, my game has been elevated because of my use of ChatGPT Pro. I use it. I use Perplexity, and it's my game has been elevated to the point where, okay, I can organize these things logically, but I still need to tie it all together and bring that final product to my client. And it's not a slight on me that I utilized AI to get there. I utilized AI to put a lot of the order in place. It was still my prompts that got everything in front of me. And it was still my final presentation to a client on what it's not really, I don't tell clients what to do because I've learned through my career, telling is not selling. And if I'm in the business of persuading a client to go down a path, I can't tell them what to do. So I've got all this information at my fingertips because of AI. I'm able to ask more questions. I'm able to ask better questions. I'm able to ask questions that maybe I hadn't thought about in the time that I'm in front of my client. So I get really excited about um, those advances and how they increase my game. They bring my game to a higher level.
Wow. So it sounds like, we have this artificial intelligence. And I think you hit on a theme there, which is it can answer any question you ask. It's going to give you, and there's some dangers of that, but we'll talk about that later. But what you're saying is that there's the intelligence of asking questions, but the wisdom of a person is knowing which questions to ask. And so, that's exciting. Um, well, we're gonna start wrapping things up. There's a couple of things I wanted to touch on before we wrap up. One is that a lot of people, I'm surprised and interested to know that Dan does improv storytelling, and You talk about nerve wracking for me to jump. I have no problem public speaking, and I love telling dad jokes. Let me tell you, I can tell some dad jokes. But standing in front of audience of people that are heckling, and doing that, let's just spend a couple of minutes of how in the heck did you get into doing improv? How does it help you? And then we'll wrap up on a few other things real quick.
Well, I appreciate the question because it's very core to who I am as a person. I mentioned earlier in the podcast that I'm a creative person. I'm an artist of sorts, and improv is an art form. Stand-up comedy is a different art form than improv. Improv's not even comedy. It turns out to be funny, but improv is all about connecting with people and communicating. Um, and the third thing I've learned, the third discipline I'm learning right now is storytelling in a format that is referred to as the moth. And you can go on YouTube and just search the moth stories, and you will be entertained for an entire evening. I mean, there's all these 6 to 7 minute stories that people tell that are just they're amazing. And if you do it in the storytelling format, you're able to get the right information out in the front end of the story and not bore people. And then you get right to the meat of the situation and right to the closing. So those are three different disciplines that I've learned. Improv, I got into it because I had a lot of friends throughout my life would say, you really ought to get into comedy. And I thought, well, I mean, what? I'm funny looking? Sure. Okay, great. I'll humor you, and maybe someday I'll do that. But there's no way I'm doing that. So when I started Integrated Growth Advisors, for a couple of tax seasons, I was thawing out. I didn't know what to do with myself in the winter months. And about 12, I've been doing this now for 14 years. 12 years ago, I was sitting there in January and I thought, I'm going to do something completely different on a Saturday because I have no work to do. I'm not a CPA anymore. And I decided to take an intro to improv class, just a 3 hour class. I'm just going to humor my friends that said I should do this. I go to a 3 hour improv class, intro to improv. And I was paired up with this girl who was a lawyer. I was an accountant and she was a lawyer. And she was funny. She says, I am the person. She says, all the fine print when you buy medication and it's all the fine print that nobody reads. I'm the one that writes that. We all laughed. That was pretty funny. But we're talking about a personality she's very dry. Okay. And I was an accountant and I was very dry too. By the end of the 3 hour class, the two of us were singing opera.
Oh my gosh.
Totally
Wow.
out of our comfort zone. And I was hooked. So I took 4 solid years of improv. There wasn't a month that went by that I wasn't taking a class, an extended class that then would have a show at the end. So I performed at the end of my class shows. Um, and and when I wanted to expand my horizons beyond improv, which is a lot of fun, I recommend it to absolutely everybody. I don't recommend stand-up comedy to everybody because it's very difficult. And I think I'm doing okay with it. It's a hobby. It's not something I'm going to earn money from.
Yeah.
But I got into stand-up comedy, and then the next step was the storytelling. So it's all about professional development, interpersonal growth, and being a better communicator and better public speaker, being able to get on a podcast and just, we didn't have a script. We've been winging
Yeah.
it. That comes from my improv. When I was an accountant, I was so uptight and I was like, there's got to be a right answer. The answer's right in this box. No, this helped free me. It freed me from a lot of restrictions that I was putting on myself as a professional. And I recommend it to everybody.
Man. Well, as we wrap things up, I always ask everybody kind of one last question, which is always if the Dan of today stumbled through a door and could go back in a time machine and you could bump into the younger Dan, what pearls of wisdom would you give the younger Dan as to avoid some potholes, some mistakes, or comfort that it's okay? What advice would the older Dan give to the younger Dan?
That's a really good question. And I've kind of been thinking about that lately. I'm in my mid 50s, and I look out on the future. I don't know how long I have left on this earth. If I were to go back in time, I would say eat
Okay.
healthy, don't drink so much, and get your exercise, and stretch yourself. And I really would go back 30 years and I'd say, uh, take an improv class. Because if I had taken an improv class 30 years ago instead of 12 years ago, where would I be today? I mean, it changed my life, improv.
Wow,
Um, Becoming a CPA changed my life too, but improv like just really just sealed the deal.
man. Well, man, it is always I always so enjoy getting to know people and their journeys and having them discuss it on the show. And again, I want to thank Dan for taking time. For those who are watching, I want to learn about Dan and Integrated Growth Advisors. You can go to www.integratedgrowthadvisors.com. It's kind of long, all one word. And but I so appreciate you taking the time, sharing your story, sharing some pearls of wisdom on here, because that's the whole idea that we do on the show. And we'll continue these conversations with great leaders from all different walks of life. Dan is the improv advisor, growth CPA. You don't see that very often. So thank you very much for your time today, Dan. We appreciate it, and we hope. Yeah, as we always do, somebody out there watches and listens to this, that they pick up a couple of things to help them get a little bit further faster on their journey. So everybody have a great day, and we'll stay tuned for next week's episode.
The collective wisdom and lessons learned from these conversations have been the inspiration for the business guidance system at 4Impact Data, helping CPA firms grow client advisory services.